Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'd like to welcome all of you to tonight's event, Active Collaboration for Transformational Change, with Jeff Walker, Jennifer McCrea, David Saltzman, and David Bornstein. I'd also like to welcome everybody who is joining us in cyberspace via our simulcast. We hope all of you will participate in the conversation as well. You can tweet questions to #CollaborateNYU or @NYU Reynolds. I thought I'd start with a very quick survey. I'd like you to raise your hand if you're currently in or once studied at a business school. All right, we got some business folks here. Raise your hand if you're currently in or once studied at a public policy school. All right, great, we got some policy folks. Education. A couple of education folks. I'm going to go out on a limb here. Law. All right, excellent. So we really do have a great diverse mix of disciplines here, and I think that's really important because I think it's a reflection of how seriously the NYU Reynolds program takes cross-university engagement. It's really the secret sauce of the program. It's business students working with public policy students, working with med school students, law school students, engineers, and on across all of NYU's schools. And we take this so seriously because we think that engaging many diverse disciplines is critical to unlocking the power of collaboration, which is really what tonight's talk is all about. Our incredible panelists, who like all of you come from very diverse disciplines and professional backgrounds themselves, Jeff Walker from the world of finance and world health, Jennifer McCrea from the world of philanthropy and fundraising and HIV prevention, David Saltzman from the world of innovative grant making to fight poverty right here in New York City, and our moderator, David Bornstein, from the world of journalism and now solutions journalism, a new field that he's helping to create. All of these panelists are here because they have hard-won lessons from their respective and very varied fields that they want to share with you about how collaboration can and must be used if we are going to have a shot at building innovative solutions to our most pressing problems and our most terrible injustices. And that's really the power and promise of social entrepreneurship, to develop innovative, more effective solutions to social change. But here's the rub. A lot of us grow up believing that competition is best at spurring innovation. It's what makes capitalism so special. It's what makes entrepreneurship so sexy. There's a lonely entrepreneur somewhere toiling away in a garage, building the next great disruptive technology. Or there's a social entrepreneur who, by sheer force of will and genius and charisma, is going to realize great social breakthrough while flying solo. I don't think this is really an accurate picture. I think true social entrepreneurship offers a much more collaborative approach to problem solving. It's problem solving that embraces many different stakeholders. It aligns resources. It crosses the public, private, and citizen sectors. And sometimes it even open sources its technology, all in the name of realizing sustainable, scalable, innovative solutions to our most pressing social problems. I think we have a long way to go before this becomes the conventional wisdom. Earlier today, I Googled competition in social entrepreneurship is a good thing, and I got 64 million hits. But when I Googled collaboration in social entrepreneurship is a good thing, I only got 4 million hits. I think today we're going to hear a lot of things that may challenge this very popular but perhaps misguided perception. So please join me in very warmly welcoming to the NYU Reynolds stage Jeff Walker, Jennifer McCrea, David Saltzman, and David Bornstein.
Well, thank you, Gabe. This is it's quite a hinge moment in the field of social entrepreneurship and social innovation. Over time, we've really moved from a focus on individuals to enterprises to these collaborative networks. And Jennifer, Jeff, and David really have spent many years weaving together these kinds of collaborative networks, figuring out how to resource them, how to fund them, and really figuring out how to align the incentives, the egos, and really the cooperative element that makes them work, and also the internal side, the internal motivations that get people to align themselves and really, in some ways, put the task ahead of themselves in many cases. So let's just speaking with Jeff first, what's the imperative behind this collaboration sort of shift in mindset? What do you think's driving it?
Hello, guys. Thank you, David, for moderating this. I appreciate it. I think it's an evolution. It's not like, oh my God, we were all wrong and now we're right, right? It's an evolution saying we keep trying to figure out how to scale impact in these social endeavors that we're all involved in, but it's reaching a point where, I don't know, it's not working exactly right. Sometimes it's frustration that, gee, politicians can't solve all our problems? Huh. Well, gee, the nonprofit sector isn't solving all the problems either, or the business sector. But we're at this point in life where people actually start saying, what if we scaled by talking with each other? Instead of arguing about impact investing being right, or social bonds being right, or social enterprises are right, there's no right model to actually impact and end deaths from malaria. What we found was bringing businesses together with multilaterals, together with nonprofits, together with business, together with local businessmen as well as global businesses, creates a model. If we all have the same common goal, deaths from malaria and lowering them, it unifies us. And so it moves our egos to another place. So this collaborative structure is actually more fun too. It's, I call it, just like playing, instruments and playing together in a jazz band. And so what is that like? We've all felt and listened to music over time. It feels great. What is that? We're playing together where you have to manage your ego. You have to actually have people so that they recognize there's a good instrument and there's a good player over there and there's another guy that you have to listen to, and let me pull back and listen to them, and let me improvise as well. And so we've got to blend and learn, and then, oh, there's an audience. I have to learn from the audience too, so let me open up to that audience. And so this collaborative process is actually one where people call it almost a spiritual activity, transformational, and so they want to do it again. Let me do it again. Well, we're starting to find that happening in places like Malaria, and we'll hear a bunch of others, where this is more successful by actually lowering the walls, having a managed ego, figuring out some common measurable outcomes. And so we're seeing that in malaria, we're seeing it in nutrition, we're seeing that in early childhood, and donors are actually opening up more of their pocketbooks because they're feeling involved and collaborating in the process. Great.
So let's to paint a picture of what this really looks like on the ground. And David, you were talking about the work that Robin Hood has done with the veterans. And what does this really look like when you make this jazz music play?
You're a rock and roller, though, so.
Rapper, come on. So Robin Hood has existed for 26 years, fighting poverty in New York City, and we've served veterans since day one. But we served veterans not so much as veterans, we served them as poor people needing some sort of assistance. So if somebody was hungry, we made sure that they received food, and we didn't check to see whether or not they had been in the military. But a few years ago, we started to see a large number of people who had volunteered to serve in Iraq and Afghanistan return home, and they were in a world of trouble. Many of them were homeless, many of them were suffering from post-traumatic stress, many of them were having trouble finding work, many of them were having trouble readjusting to home life. And we got together with Admiral Mike Mullen, who at the time was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he said, we in this country are very good at recruiting people to fight wars, and we're pretty good at fighting wars, but we're really terrible at looking out for people who volunteered to serve. And so let's see if we can set up a partnership with Robin Hood to make New York City a model for the rest of the country when it comes to serving veterans and their families. And so we recruited an advisory board that Admiral Mullen agreed to co-chair, and other people on the advisory board included Tom Brokaw and John Stewart and Brian Williams, Lloyd Blankfein, who's the chairman and CEO of Goldman Sachs, people from all sorts of major financial institutions as well as major corporations, and a number of veterans. And they came together and to say, okay, what is it that we need to do to help veterans? And we came at it from all sorts of different angles. And we were able to dramatically lower the number of veterans living on the streets of New York City. At the time that we started this effort, there were more than 300 homeless veterans living on the streets, not in shelters, but living on the streets. Tonight, there'll be fewer than 25 veterans living on the streets of New York City, and I think that in the next year, New York City will become the first major city in the United States without a single veteran living on the street. More importantly, we were able to work with a number of major employers, not just in New York City, but across the country, who are providing jobs to hundreds of thousands of veterans and made it a priority. We also worked to try to move the Veterans Administration to do a better job of serving veterans. That's been much tougher, I think, than anybody other than Admiral Mullen anticipated it to be. And we've been able to work to make sure that veterans have easier and better access to mental health care providers. Now, none of that would have happened if Robin Hood had tried to do that on our own, or if one individual had tried to do it on her own or his own. It was the fact that it was a collaboration, a public-private partnership, bringing people together from different disciplines with different experiences who could apply pressure in different ways, that made it possible for any real and meaningful change to take place.
So in some ways, you're redefining. So if we think of the social entrepreneur as the social innovator that has been described a lot, the social entrepreneur is an enterprise builder, let's say. In this case, you're talking about a switchboard mechanism, a recruitment mechanism, an alignment mechanism. Is that essentially the role that Robin Hood is playing? Are you sort of now playing this coordination switchboard function?
Well, I think that we play multiple roles depending on the nature of the collaboration and the nature of the partnership. So sometimes we're, to use your phrase, a switchboard operator, which I think is an antiquated phrase, and most people here wouldn't know what that means.
Is there a 2.0 version of that?
You're a node.
And other times we're playing different roles. To use Jeff's metaphor, sometimes we're the lead guitarist, sometimes we're a rhythm guitarist, sometimes we're a bass guitarist, depending on what the band needs. And that's kind of the fun and interesting part, is that you get to, again, staying with Jeff's metaphor, you get to use different chops at different times.
Let's talk about malaria. Both you, Jen, and Jeff have worked on this issue, and this is a massive global collaboration that has so many parts in it. Can you describe the work that you've done and just paint a picture of what's actually happening today vis-a-vis the issue, vis-a-vis malaria and eradicating it?
So there's a whole effort around global health. And one of the great models to start collaborations that are successful, you're trying to look at and say, have there been other successful ones I can use as a model? And malaria seems to be one of those. So deaths from malaria have come down over the last 6 years from 1.1 million per year down to 450,000 this last year, and it's on track to come down to near zero by the end of 2015. It was a collaboration that came together, but it wasn't simple. It wasn't like, we're all going to do this one, right? And so there's a guy named Ray Chambers who in particular took some ownership of this and saw some kids in malaria comas and said, we got to do something about this. But the reason Ray was a good person for this collaboration to be built around, and there was a lot of people involved, but he was an honest broker. So I think it's important when you're developing a collaboration to have somebody who's an honest broker. Ray didn't know all the science behind malaria. He didn't know all the science behind how to prevent it, but he knew how to ask the questions. And so Ray knew that he could go out and call some people together. He had a great network to pull from and say, we need to stop this. We need to lower the deaths. What can we do? And he found out there was bed nets. And so after, believe it or not, it took a couple of years to figure out and get everybody to agree that bed nets were a good answer. Gates Foundation wanted to do vaccines only, and Ray said, by the time you finish the vaccines, 20 million people will die. Do you really want to only focus on vaccines? And that changed their minds. He got the White House behind it because of his other networks. He got Global Fund to support and back. And what he said was, what are these levers that we in the business world could use and understand, logistics-wise, et cetera, to build these collaborations? And gee, we ought to get Exxon involved. And so their community, where they were doing business, was in areas that had high malaria rates. And so it was natural advocate and supporter for a malaria initiative. Who'd have guessed that? Exxon? But it was natural for them. And used Acumen. So Acumen had a portfolio company that they could build, and they did, in Kenya to support and build bed nets. Sumitomo. But then also you sit there going, how do we get Save the Children on board? How do we get the faith-based community on board? So World Vision came on, and in Nigeria actually helped us figure out how to get the Christians and the Muslims to actually open up their networks and start distributing nets. So all of a sudden you started asking these questions about how do we get things done if we have a common measurable goal? And they set up something called alma2015.org. You can go online and see it, and how we measure it. So how can we all continue to go back and say, where are we? Deaths from malaria, distribution of bed nets by country every 4 months. They get together with the African presidents and ministers of health and say, where are we? Are you behind? Are you ahead? Is there issues that we need to get more nets? Is there financing problems or issues? We need consultants to come out with logistics plans. So he took a very collaborative process and said, I have more power if I unify everyone who has a common goal, which is lowering deaths from malaria. I don't have to worry about one NGO funding itself and backing that one NGO to solve the problem, because that's impossible. How do we get local businessmen in Nigeria, in Zambia, to actually have these common goals and have them feel like they can participate? So when everybody feels like they understand their roles, understanding the goals that they can achieve together, measure them, feedback, communicate. So this honest broker, Ray, this common measurable set of goals, collaborative glue, which is the team that Ray built, which is a small number of people who actually can say, between the meetings, I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm going to make sure the resources are around. And so a slight investment, for example, McKinsey, we paid McKinsey to do an analysis saying what's the ROI on bringing out bed nets. Turns out it's a 10-to-1 payback. $5 billion invested, $50 billion payback in 10 years. Global Fund said, okay, we're buying. And so it's not just HIV, it turns out we need to add malaria as well. And so people were unified around it, got rallied around it, and started now saying, how can we tap into the malaria networks? And we're building community health worker strategies, tapping into that malaria network that we can rely on. Polio is almost finished, obviously, with another kind of collaboration. Jennifer can talk about hers in prevention of mother-child transmission. In fact, I think it's a great story. Maybe tell that one.
Sure. Yeah, so we're working on, very similar actually, similar model to the malaria one, and we're working on, we have a very specific goal on a specific deadline of eliminating mother-to-child transmission of HIV by December 31st, 2015. And we're on trajectory to do that. And it's a global stakeholder initiative that has this kind of connective glue that's holding it together by the private sector, but we're working with the UN, we're working with UNAIDS, with the US government, with African governments, obviously, most importantly, civil society, implementing partners, and it's become this unifying principle around we can actually get this done. The science is there, the money's there, the political will is there. Now how do we continually find these catalytic, high leverage opportunities that can unlock where we're getting stuck? And I think in fact, all of the work we all do in the end is about always finding, and by the way, I think this is just like life lesson, is where are we getting stuck? We were just talking about the flow state right before we came on stage, and so much of it is, resources, for example. I absolutely know and fundamentally believe that resources, not just money, but time and networks and creativity and life experience and people's passions flow, but we put all these obstacles and barriers up that block the flow of those. And so much of our work in being collaborative leaders is really understanding what those obstacles are and how do we get rid of them, or how do we at least see through them so that they're not stopping us. And so these examples are great examples where we're seeing obstacles and just consciously removing them.
Hey, you left the cherry. It just launched today. Tell us, talk about bornfreeafrica.org.
So it's, bornfreeafrica.org. Well, we've been doing the work actually for a couple of years. So we've been very involved in Nigeria in particular, and which accounts for 28% of the burden. Some of my colleagues who lead the effort are here, and we have a fantastic team who are actually sitting in the Ministry of Health. And we, as the private sector, have really been, and it's a big private sector collaborative with Chevron and McCrea and J&J and General GE and others who are helping us find catalytic talent who can make sure that we're meeting these goals. But in the meantime, it became clear as we were working with, on the advocacy side, that we needed a general awareness campaign. And so launched today a massive initiative. You may have seen it, and certainly, hopefully you will see it in the next couple of days, with the fashion industry. The fashion industry has been long partners with, in the AIDS issue. And so we went out and recruited 22 women designers who are moms, ranging from Stella McCartney and Prada and Victoria Beckham, et cetera. And they all designed these beautiful pieces, a piece for a mom and for a child, and partnered with Amazon, and we're selling those on, it's actually Amazon's first foray into anything international, and we're selling it on there, and it's raised a lot of visibility because the collection itself is a very beautiful fashion, I think, has that kind of interesting sex appeal that doesn't always come with the kind of work we're all trying to do, and it's all moms. And so we really talked to all these designers and said, each and every one of you had an HIV test, but not one of you had to worry about whether your baby was going to be HIV positive or not. And so it really resonated with the designers themselves, and they have been just fantastic in terms of telling the story and being partners with us. So it launched today, so feel free to go on to Amazon, shopbop.com, and buy your Born Free Prada skirt.
It will be matched, right?
And it's matched, dollar for dollar. McAids is matching. 100% of the proceeds, by the way, are going to the project. And McAids has very generously given us a match of every dollar that's given will be matched up to $500,000, which is fantastic.
But over the last couple of years, the number of transmissions has gone down, right?
Yeah, we've had, a 33% decline in the last, since 2009, and the trajectory is phenomenal. Our strategy, our collaborative strategy, is really one, as I said, about finding these sort of catalytic places where we can inject talent into particularly the countries that are most stuck. So we have 7 countries that we've identified. We have fantastic talent on the ground who are literally, it's old school blocking and tackling. There's no big, secret bullet behind it. It's getting women into clinics, getting women initiated onto treatment. The process has been simplified over the last couple of years because the drug regimen, and I won't get too into the weeds, has been much more simplified. But it's absolutely, a story that I think exemplifies how the global community, civil society, implementing partners, and private sector can come together, and again, certainly with African governments as champions, and of course the women themselves, to really make this happen. A lot of it, I believe, is the specific goal and the specific deadline too.
I just want to hit home, the impact that we're talking about here of pretty much ending homelessness among veterans in New York, reducing malaria from, what did you say, 1.1 million to 450,000, and in the case of mother-to-child HIV transmission, I think gone from a 400% increase in clinics in Nigeria that now provide these antiretrovirals. So like from 500 to about 2,000 clinics and increasing to 5. This is really, really quite dramatic impact, and it's not the kind of thing that, my field, solutions journalism, is trying to help people understand where these opportunities are to actually address these, to slay the dragons of our time, and to help people understand that these are doable challenges. They're hard. And the interesting thing is that there's now a shift in the skill set that we're asking people to master in order to put together these collaborations. And as Jeff alluded to, you do have to sort of check your ego at the door. But I would imagine in that glue that you talked about, there's a lot of very high-level skills in terms of bringing people in, helping them to see how they fit into a larger picture. There's probably a lot of empathy, a lot of very high-level social skills in sort of forming these collaborations. That's what I'm intuiting. What have you actually seen in terms of building these how do people prepare for it if they're in college or in university today and wanting to get good at it?
I think this is the new generation is already set up for collaboration. And so there is some of the older generation, particularly in academia, where they're not used to collaborating. So a tenure professor, in my experience, is a pretty lousy collaborator. A politician's a pretty lousy collaborator. And a doctor is a pretty lousy collaborator, but I'm kind of okay with that because I want doctors to be pretty confident. But the issue of what does that mean and was that experience, guess who has these skills? Business types. So 15 years and older in business types, they're looking and dying to work on these kind of issues. And how do they become successful? Through collaboration, through growing networks. And that's kind of what our book's about, is that generosity network. How do you find these opportunities? How do you find people to work together? How did David build a board of people who really like hanging out with each other, talking about philanthropy? And they actually have similar passions. And so these managed ego kind of operations, this might be the Peter Drucker kind of next career opportunity that you can join up with. And guess who also are natural great partners? Individuals coming out of school, 21 to 35, who are passionate, who understand how to work in flat structures, who know what a network really is like. So these are natural partners coming together for a lot of these social enterprises. And so they're starting to recognize that no matter how good KIPP schools are, and they're awesome, today they have 150 schools. 5 years, their goal is 500 schools, which is great. But you know how many schools there are in America? They'll never scale. So how do you take these ideas that are generated by the great social entrepreneurs and try to figure out how to scale them? These are really interesting puzzles that people who are looking at these higher goals, which a lot of people are these days, want to work on these puzzles.
You know, and I would, oh, sorry. You know, I would just add that the skill set to me really is about finding ways to break down, again, these barriers and these walls, and to see that none of this stuff is disaggregated. You know, even though we're working on HIV or malaria or veterans and homelessness, none of that is disaggregated from any of the other work we're doing, so it's a point of entry. And so how we all look at the world, and I think that's a changing mindset that we all see since we live in such a more globally complex place, is that to say clean water is disaggregated from girls' education, is disaggregated from extreme poverty or education, is, you know, a recipe for disaster. And so people who come into the space, and I see this especially with philanthropists, just to take a minute and talk about what I've seen when people really go through a true philanthropic journey and get to the place where I think they really are adding value, is they very often start their journey from a kind of a social worldview, which is, you know, I've made a certain amount of you know, had a certain amount of success, made a certain amount of money, I'm going to start giving back. And I understand kind of my place in the world by, you know, where my name goes on the, you know, the building or my tables at the gala or whatever. And then I see, you know, philanthropists start to really say, well, you know what, there are real problems in the world. And so let's look at impact and let's look at solutions and let's look at how can we actually create change. And that's, of course, I think where a lot of philanthropists have a lot of impact, and measurement becomes very important and all of that. But then I really do see the most sophisticated philanthropists I work with, and I've had this conversation with a lot of very successful philanthropists where they say, the world really isn't a problem to be solved. There are real problems to solve, but it's all so deeply interconnected that it's so much less about problem solving and so much more about creating these networks, these jazz bands that are going to lean into this, but then move on to the next thing and the thing after that and the thing after that. And it becomes much more about co-creation and listening and vulnerability and, you know, being adaptive and willing to, because if you think you have the answer, I think that's always going to slow us down. And so it becomes a much more adaptive, risk-taking proposition than it does just like we have the solution, we have the answer.
Yeah. So we're going to go with the conversation for 5 more minutes, and then we're going to leave a robust 40 minutes for questions. So start thinking about your questions. You have really great people here who have deep insights into philanthropy, using resources for impact. So think about your questions. I just want to ask, put up your hand if you've been part of a collaboration that was really joyful and you felt had big impact. I want to know if this is a generalized experience. Well, that's great. So we're doing more of it than we think. So All right, so we have a few more minutes of...
And you're going to talk about solutions-oriented journalism.
Yeah, so, okay, I'll put it in my... I'm used to asking questions. So part of this, I've been part of moving from author, journalist, to starting a network with a group of other journalists to essentially change the framework in journalism. The primary framework in journalism today is journalists believe they're watchdogs. We help the world change by pointing out its deficiencies every morning at breakfast. And we've come to realize that actually the missing information in many conversations is really what can we do? And what are the ideas out there that are emerging? Because the secrets that we need to reveal today are not just people harming society, but people who have great ideas to help society, but those are unknown too. So we've now been working with about 35 newsrooms across the country, and I'm beginning to see that the role is it's really changed the way I think of my role in the world. As a journalist, I was always thinking, what can I do? What story can I cover? Where should I pay attention? And there was a lot of ego in that. Where's my byline going to appear and so forth? And working now in this network with other journalists, it's really very much how do we facilitate this so that other journalists in their newsrooms or freelancers have the capacity, the motivation, the awareness of the ideas in order to be able to run with this kind of journalism. And it's really a creative challenge. I found that I've gone from a point where I was doing something for 20 years, I was feeling like I had achieved a kind of level of mastery or fluency with it, and now I'm a total beginner in building this, in working in a very, very different way. And as David and Jeff and Jen were saying, it's very humbling because you realize it's all about trying to elicit, and the question isn't what can I do, it's what can we all do. But I wanted to get back to David because I think that Robinhood, it's particularly hard with Robinhood because it's such a famous organization. There's so many very, very influential, powerful people who come together there. And I would just imagine that it's a particularly difficult challenge. But has it been?
You know, I think that people like to win. You, David, Jennifer, and you, Jeff, just talked about 3 types of victories that would be impossible for people to achieve on their own, that are only possible for people to achieve if they collaborate. So if we want to wipe malaria off the face of the earth, if we want to wipe HIV off the face of the earth, if we want to reinvent journalism, we're going to have to work together. So I think for the members of Robinhood's board, for the people who work at Robinhood, for the people who are stakeholders in Robinhood, there's the realization, and it's a pretty simple and straightforward one, that more hearts beat fewer hearts, that more brains beat fewer brains, and that more dollars beat fewer dollars. And so people love being on a winning team if the choice is a winning team or a losing individual effort. And so it's actually bringing people together has been a remarkably fun and exciting endeavor in which each person feels that the likelihood of success is greatly increased.
Very interesting.
So how do you build a collaboration then with other stakeholders? So you have your board, you have businesses, you got a lot of nonprofits that are in your portfolio, 210 or however so many, and the city, new mayor coming in. How do you start continuing to refresh that collaboration? It's not easy.
Well, I think that there are new and exciting opportunities. So, for instance, the new mayor has announced that he hopes to build or preserve 200,000 homes in New York City. Now, this really is exciting and interesting to us at Robinhood because for 26 years we've been trying to fight homelessness, but despite our best efforts and partnerships with others, homelessness has more than doubled on our watch. When we started Robinhood, we were appalled that on any given night, roughly 10,000 children were living in homeless shelters. Tonight it will be 22,000 children who live in homeless shelters. Homelessness increased under Mayor Koch, under Mayor Dinkins, under Mayor Giuliani, and under Mayor Bloomberg. well, now there's this wonderful opportunity to create a partnership with the real estate industry, with the de Blasio administration, with people who are desperately in need of housing, with people who think about policy, and with people who have brains and hearts and dollars to put up against this program. So maybe at some point, a few years from now, we can gather again and we can talk about how malaria has been wiped out, HIV has been wiped out, journalism has been reinvented, and journalism has been wiped out by a new and better form of journalism, right? And there's no longer a single child living in a homeless shelter in New York City. Wouldn't that be fantastic?
Is there anybody here who works in government? Put up your hand if you work in government. Oh, few brave souls. So this is an interesting thing. I at a lot of conferences that are organized sort of around where social entrepreneurship is a theme, you will often find one out of, or two people out of hundreds who are working in government. And yet each of you has basically said the main impact has come, or a lot of the impact has come through these partnerships with government. It's actually impossible to have that level of impact unless you do. So what's the secret sauce when you're actually trying to engage government in particular? And then we'll go to questions after this one.
So there's no secret sauce. We're still trying to figure this stuff out, right? One is, in the global health space, for example, don't forget it's not all about us. It's about all governments. So it's about the local governments. It's about the local states. I'm on the Brookings Advisory Board, right? They think the cities are where the power is today, not the federal government. So where are the constituencies that you're involved in? But also don't forget, the government is not the single solitary answer. It is one of the stakeholders in this larger solution. And I find then if you work with politicians, they're kind of like, you can help me? Like we're working with USAID and the state, and they have billions of dollars going into HIV, but they're really open to, how do we do this better? But they're bureaucratic. Yes, they are. Trust me, the UN, bureaucratic. But then if you can come in and kind of say, there's another way of looking at this, I can bring other stakeholders in, universities, bureaucratic, but they're all starting to open up saying there's got to be a different way. How do we build these nodes in the networks of action? So as long as you don't center all the change around one politician, one group, one central government figure, Gates Foundation is dying to partner with Save the Children, who's dying to partner with USAID, who's loving to partner with Global Fund, 191 countries, really think the Global Fund is the best thing they've ever heard of, and it's hugely effective. And so the governments are always involved in some single way, but it's really outside of the normal way government would normally be seen, I think.
Plus, I think that's where private sector and private philanthropy becomes so important because it catalyzes government. It can fill in the gaps. It can create these sparks of innovation that the governments just can't do, and that's certainly what we've seen in our case. That it's been hugely catalytic, and that we can quickly move not a tremendous amount of resources, tiny in the scheme of things, little amounts of money that have opened up huge government funding, not just domestic government funding, but government funding in Africa, and it's been really important part of our strategy. I would say, in fact, probably the key part of our strategy.
All right, so there's two microphones, one there and one there. And please come ask some questions and just introduce yourself briefly and say who you are and who's going to be brave and go first. Cosmo. Wonderful Cosmo.
Hi. Is this on? Hi. My name is Cosmo Fujiyama. I'm an alum of NYU Reynolds and of the Policy School. I'm interested to hear a reflection from everyone on the panel about how you measure collaboration within your own organizations. What's the collaboration quotient that helps you steer your team if you're not collaborating well? Your staff members, how do you coach and train your teams to collaborate? If you could even reflect on an example of when collaboration didn't work, it would be great. As somebody who's trying to build a culture of collaboration, how do you bake that into the DNA of your company or organization?
Great question.
It's a really, really good and really, really smart and really, really hard question. And I think that building a spirit of collaboration has got to be part of the heart and soul of an organization. And it starts with recruiting the right people and training the right people and making sure that you have a team that, to go back to Jeff's metaphor, where you have people who are capable of playing lead guitar in every song, but are really happy at times to play rhythm guitar, or really happy at times to play bass. My friend and colleague and teacher, Lars Johns, is in the crowd over there, and Lars teaches me every day about the power of collaboration, because he's the single best connector I've ever met, but he's constantly helping other people learn how to connect, and likes, I think, nothing more than to teach others how to do what he does so naturally and so well. And I think that if Robin Hood hadn't been lucky enough to meet Lars 15 years ago, I wouldn't be sitting here today as part of this conversation.
I'd also add, I know you have something to add too, Jeff, that, I think often, especially in our culture, there's the kind of I did it my way mentality, which we were talking about earlier, which is and I've worked with plenty of really smart visionary people, but they really want just people to execute their ideas. So they want people around them who are saying, they're holding their idea really, really tight and believe it's the answer again, but, want to hire people around them who are yes people. And that's obviously a recipe for, not collaborating and not scaling. And I've seen it over and over and over again. And so I think part of this, question of collaborative leadership is how do you make everybody leaders in the organization or the effort in different ways. And so it's leadership rich, not, this sort of single solitary visionary person who's trying to get people around him or her to do their bidding.
So there's a line, the mirror of the other allows you to see yourself more clearly. And so understanding the feedback from others, in 360 process we've used a lot in feedback from your team. So Lars will tell you more about yourself than you can know about yourself through self-inquiry. So using a 360 has seemed pretty effective. My old firm used it all the time. And so the questioning of others, ask my wife how I am as a collaborator, don't ask me, right? And
I have, Jeff.
Yeah, I know, it's a problem, I know. And so this open feedback system, and you don't just have to ask people who are your employees. You ask your portfolio companies. You ask, your exec directors, how we doing? How's Lars doing? You ask your board, how we doing? And when you start that open communication, you start learning a lot, right? You'll hear it.
Yeah, I have the least experience here in terms of we have an organization and a culture that we've been running for a little over a year now, about a year and a quarter. And we've already seen that it's very important to give people the permission to speak up and to make their ideas known. And in some case, we've had a little bit of conflict to insist on that their ideas get a fair hearing when, this little ship of the organization trods over people's ideas as it happens, as just with the pace of work. So we've actually just started a process, a culture we're going to integrate into our, we have weekly and monthly meetings that look at certain types of issues. And one of them is, how's our culture? That we sort of actually address in a very explicit way once a month in a part of this meeting where everybody is given the permission to speak specifically to this question of whether or not they feel their voice is fully being heard in this organization. We do not know if this will work or not, but we're going to try it out. It'll work.
Hi, Marilla Lee. I'm a student at the Wagner School of Public Service. And my question is, in assembling the jazz band, if you will, what are some of the roadblocks that keep coming up over and over again that feel like you're really struggling to address them?
Do you want me to start? I love the jazz band analogy because Jeff and I started a nonprofit with Quincy Jones, the great music producer, where we were bringing together a lot of nonprofits working on music and kids. And I tell this, Jeff is so sick of this story, but it's one I think that's really, really indicative of of one of the major roadblocks, especially in mobilizing resources, because I do think ideas just stay ideas unless they get resourced. And again, not just money, but people's time and networks and creativity. And so we do need to be really mindful of how we're resourcing these things. But when we were creating the Quincy Jones, this nonprofit, this consortium, we were thinking, what do we actually call this? And we knew we wanted to use Quincy's name, but we ended up calling it the Quincy Jones Music Consortium, and the reason we called it that was because the word consortium comes from the Latin word constare, and that means to stand together. And it's very different than how I think we often approach folks who are looking to quote unquote collaborate with us, but we really just want them to write checks and kind of stay out of our way. And that's, you know, more of a client kind of relationship or a customer relationship. And the word client comes from the Latin word clientum, which means to lean against. And that's a very fragile place because you're basically trying to extract something from someone versus trying to get a group of people or a community of leaders and organizations to stand together to really create real change. And it's a different dynamic, again, than when you have one person who's kind of holding the vision and you're trying to get a group of people around him or her to execute. So I would say the biggest obstacle that I see is this, well, there's one other one that I'd just add. The biggest obstacle I'd say is that I see that we're not good enough at creating consortiums of people who really believe that we're standing together to create change. And the other is money. Because we've got so much baggage around money and so many issues around money. And if I had one wish in life, it is that we would stop infusing money with values of scarcity and control and power and, you know, those kinds of things, and start infusing and believing and knowing that money infused with values of courage and justice and care and love is a super important resource, but it should never be at the middle of the relationship. And so that's the other challenge, is that all these power dynamics get created when money gets at the center of relationships, which we often let it. And it happens in collaborations because we get very competitive often. And so it's how do you get money out of the center of the equation, see that it's the gas that goes in the car, it's not the car itself, it's not the driver, it's just the gas. But it's a really important piece of it. And so if we keep it in perspective and you know, I always say go into these conversations standing up, never kneeling down, it's a whole different kind of relationship.
There's totally agree. I mean, it's way too much. People asking for help is, what we always advise, is the wrong thing to do. Never ask for help, because that sounds like you're begging. It sounds like you're on bended knee to the other, because you're bringing something to the table too. No matter what passion and whatever objective you have, you're bringing something really cool to the table. So are they. They have resources. You have resources. You're just putting them together to do something really neat together. And so if you're coming out with this confident attitude that I have something that I really want to, you know, I'm excited about, and you may be excited about as well, that's a real advantage. So coming in without feeling like you're begging, but also understanding there's fear on the other side, the donor. The donor's afraid. They're afraid of failing. They're afraid you just want them for their money. They're afraid that, you know, their friends or spouses aren't going to, you know, approve the deal that they're trying to do. They're not going to tell you about that. So understanding there's fear on both sides when you're trying to build a consortium and you're trying to build linkages to the others. The other criticism I get sometimes is this isn't the American way. The American way is to identify entrepreneurs. That's why social entrepreneurship is so great, right? We're picking the right person, and Wendy Kopp's the best thing in the whole world, and look what she's doing. We'll celebrate the entrepreneur and put her on the cover of Forbes magazine. I love Wendy Kopp. But she's not going to solve the educational crisis by herself, and she knows that. So understanding what the bigger cause is, from just the entrepreneur, from just the organization itself, to the larger cause that we're all working on together. But there's a lot of donors that are still saying, too bureaucratic. I don't want to have to worry about pulling other people together. I'm action-oriented. I just want to pick the right person, give them the money, and I'm done. I think that's wrong. And so understanding, though, and getting people the experience, the entrepreneurs the experience, to say, yeah, actually together, we have one in early childhood, and we've got 5 families that have now come together, and they're all kind of going, we were really frustrated working by ourselves. And you guys being this collaborative glue and this early childhood strategy, it's actually fun. And we actually got Sesame Street to start helping us. And we got PNC Bank to start helping us because that's where their credit is. We would never have done that. And we actually might influence Congress. Wow. So doing this together all of a sudden opened up avenues that they didn't expect. But a couple of them entered it kind of going, I don't know, I'm not so sure.
I think just to, and by the way, I'd like to put in a plug for Jennifer and Jeff's book, The Generosity Network, which is a fantastic book that really embodies related to fundraising, how to think about fundraising through this lens of abundance and not scarcity. And it's really a wonderful book, and I've learned a lot. I'm actually taking Jennifer's course on, that's how much I think it's important. I think one thing to mention with regard to your question is that we do live in a society that is just radically individualistic. I mean, it's just, we construct achievement, we measure ourselves by our tests and our GPAs and our SATs. I mean, we're used to actually thinking of achievement and probably at some level our self-worth based on these individual marks of achievement. And that's pretty strongly reinforced for many years. And then suddenly you go into an organization and it's the collaboration. And so you have these two different signals. And I think it's very, very important for the leadership in an organization to really address that and to recognize that people do need to really feel that their personal achievements matter, and at the same time that their contributions matter, and to speak to both of them at the same time without feeling that they have to choose me or the we group. I think to face that head on, we don't live in the society of the full collaboration that we might have a century from now. And so to be realistic about that is important.
Hi, my name is Rachel Barrett, and I'm with the Dave Nee Foundation, and my question is about money. And if we're talking about the transformational change and bringing different actors and stakeholders together to work towards a common goal, do we need different revenue models? Do we need to move away from grant making or major gifts? Do we need to do more looking deeply at the social impact bonds? Does there need to be a different revenue model to marry the transformative process that you've created with a collaboration?
I think we need every possible revenue model, and that money is going to be one incredibly important resource. There are lots of other important resources as well, and I think that there are lots of ways of getting those other resources in as well. So I would encourage all of us to think about every type of magnet for every type of resource that we need.
Yeah, I mean, social bonds are a really interesting idea. They're just taking a long time to get started. We did one in Boston just recently with a group, New Profit, that I'm involved in. It took a year and a half to design it. $21 million deal, $6 million in philanthropy. Goldman Sachs came in. It's a great model, but I wouldn't want to rely on it by itself. There's this really a lot of good stuff in impact investing. There's a lot of good stuff in double bottom line structures or B Corp structures. These are all awesome. And each one of them, Malaria used in some shape or form. I can literally list it out. So we used all of them.
There's a question from that came in through Twitter. Foundations often have very specific siloed issue areas. How do you reconcile trying to collaborate while appealing to such focused foundations for funding?
Well, first of all, I'd say, foundation funding in this country is a tiny little piece of the actual revenue pie. Statistically, 90 to 95 cents of every dollar that's raised in the U.S., and this stat is actually not inconsistent with many places in the world, comes from living individuals. I personally believe, and I think there's a huge important role for foundations to play. I do a lot of consulting with foundations. I talk to program officers all the time who want to do a better job of partnering and collaborating with their grantees. I personally believe we spend so much time looking for revenue sources from corporations and foundations because we have this deep human fear of rejection. And so somehow it's psychologically easier for us to go to a nameless, baseless corporation who can reject us than another human being. And so, one of the techniques or beliefs that I know Jeff and I both employ and talk about in the book is that you really can't be rejected if you're talking to someone in the way that we were describing earlier, which is, standing up and believing so strongly in the values and the mission that you're holding, and you're inviting people to join with you. Now, if you speak to somebody and you're working on HIV and they say, my passion is the oceans, I'm going to say, go work on the oceans, because that's not a rejection of me, that's a victory for our planet. And by the way, here are 3 amazing collaborations or consortiums that are working on oceans projects. But I really encourage people, which isn't exactly answering the question that was asked, but I really encourage people to be thinking about revenue sources with individuals, because also individuals bring so much more than just money. To Jeff's point, so do foundations and so can corporations, but individuals can bring their networks and their life experiences and their passions, and it's the way, I always say it's not really what your issue is, it's who your people are. And so really thinking about that, who your generosity network is really matters.
Yeah, Robin Hood Foundation.
What did I do to you? Though we have foundation as our last name, we're not a foundation, and we have to raise money every year in order to give out money. And I think that's one of the things that keeps us honest. We're better grant makers because we're grant seekers, and we're better grant seekers because we're grant makers. But I think what I'd say to this Twitter question, and I'm not sure if I can keep my response to 140 characters, but is that sometimes in your jazz band or your jazz orchestra, you need a triangle player, and there's somebody who only wants to play triangle. That's fantastic when that matchup occurs. Other times, there are people who are interested in playing lots of instruments and taking on lots of roles. More cowbell. So I think that you're not going to be able to recruit everybody to every project or every funder to every project.
So there's another Twitter question here, but you've been standing for a long time, so you go.
Sorry. Thank you. Hi, my name is Connie Lewin. Sorry, let me just. And I work for a social enterprise called She. And we're specifically addressing the issue of lack of access to affordable pads by developing a business that's manufacturing pads locally, and we're doing that in Rwanda. And one thing I wanted to address and bring up was just to bring back to the point of government and talking about filling in the gap. Because we've been successful in creating active partnerships with local NGOs and organizations. And where we're now kind of facing a barrier is with our manufacturing businesses working with the government. It's getting through the regulatory process, whether it's water, electricity, all the infrastructure. And within our organization, we're debating, if we were a business in the US, we would just hire a lobbyist. But given that we're in Rwanda and we're trying to be focused on building that specific business, we oftentimes have this conversation of mission creep, and do we want to take on more, so investing in building the infrastructure to make our business successful versus building those collaborative partnerships. And I know for right now, we fill in the gap through private philanthropy. But my specific question was, is there a conversation, and you brought up, Jeff, at working at the UN with bringing the governments to empower and even create and foster a sense of entrepreneurship among people within government themselves, and specifically those who are the middle managers. So, I read your book, and with the malaria, you went to the heads of state and were able to move forward. But not every social enterprise has the time and the capacity to go to the head of state. And the people that we're dealing with are middle managers who want to do change but are constrained by policies, either policies that exist or don't exist, so they don't have the decision-making capacity. And so I was just wondering if there are any active collaborations to create that sense of entrepreneurship among the middle managers in many of these governments, whether in African governments specifically where we're working, or just in other countries as well.
Thank you. And as we answer, I'm just mindful that there's four Four more people are standing, and we have about 15 minutes to go. So
we'll do it quick, because it's an easy answer. Ha, ha, ha. So a couple things. One is embedding experienced entrepreneurs into middle layers of governments is really interesting, and it's what the U.S. government's starting to do. And actually, we're lending people. So in one project we're working on, a guy's working for 6 months. In fact, Jennifer's partner, John McCrea, helped find this individual and putting him into USAID. And so he's stirring him up. He's kind of like, this is the way we're doing it over here. How do we set up a task force? And people are kind of going, oh, that's the way you do it, and that's okay. I'm not getting, my career's not ending because I'm actually doing it. And I can always blame it on that guy because he's leaving anyway. I work in Tibet, and there's something called Tibetan Village Project, and we're actually training Tibetans entrepreneurship. And so how do you have them get jobs? How do you actually create businesses, whether it's motorcycle repair shops or whether it's Tonka painting shops or whatever it might be? What we're finding, though, is the most successful thing for us is to find mentors for those entrepreneurs. And so the mentors have already figured out how to work within a government process. And they actually are getting Chinese mentors in Chengdu and other places. And so we're matching them up. And so they're learning and they're finding advocates that are helping them through the system. And that's true. We're finding that's true in Nigeria. We're finding that's true in Zambia. We're finding that's true in many other countries. I'm sure it's true in Rwanda, where you're sitting going, who are those individuals that I can link to? And some of that's the business schools there. There's some great business schools in Nigeria and some others that are producing some interesting talent that you can bring back. We're also doing that in Global Health Corps, where Global Health Corps, woman Barbara Bush runs Global Health Corps, and it's bringing these talented health experts and embedding them after they're trained in nonprofit organizations back into the government systems in each of the African nations that they're coming from. And so they're coming in with collaborative attitudes and orientations through this experience.
And this is on our project, Born Free, 100% our strategy. That's actually how we're getting the work done on the ground. And so we have an influencer strategy at the highest levels of government, like you're talking about, so that we can help pave the way. But it's very much about this catalytic talent. And so you can learn more about it. If you go to our website, there's a fair amount of information on how we're using this specific talent strategy to really tremendously increase the trajectory of results. So it's a good question.
Hi, my name is Kavitha Bali, and I work for a large relief and development organization. I think many of us desperately want to collaborate more, but we're constrained by the funding sources, in some cases, of traditional funders. I'm surprised that there aren't more funders that have collaboration as a criteria for funding. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about some of the conversations you're having to influence those funders about having collaboration as part of the criteria.
I did a webinar with the Stanford Social Innovation Review a couple months ago, and that was the key topic is how do you get all of those funders to start collaborating. And basically a number of different foundations came on and said, we're there. This is what we want. And he said, you know what happens when 3 NGOs all come in with a common proposal they're behind? You get funded. You know what happens in university when you get 3 deans show up with a funder? They're working together. You get funded. And so this is not actually the issue of educating the foundations as much and donors as much as it is the people who are trying to affect the cause, saying break down your own barriers. Break down the barriers of other NGOs and others that are actually making these ideas and these proposals. Work out how they're going to start collaborating and then come together. And because go to a donor and say, we needed a small amount of money to hire somebody that's going to hold us together, to harmonize our effort. We have that in malaria. We're doing that in community health workers. We have a harmonization group. It takes a little bit of money to have a couple people track and make it all work. Phyllis and Clara here in the community health worker strategies, and they've been geniuses in pulling together everybody from USAID to UNICEF to the Gates Foundation around a common cause. And it doesn't cost a lot. So several of us have been funding them for several years. You can find those people to be the collaborative glue, and funders are more likely to be interested.
Hello, Naphtali Martinez, SCPS, NYU here. And the question that I have is related to technology. And how do you use technology, especially social media, in your collaboration and your networking, and in order to reach out more people, and perhaps along the way, thinking different models of the work that you do that will fit within the technology and the reach that you could get with that.
So I think we're all utilizing technology in all sorts of ways. I'll tell you one project that I'm particularly excited about that Robinhood is involved in here in New York City. I don't know how many of you know about 311. It's the city's effort to connect people with every possible service that isn't an emergency service. Well, one of the problems is if you're hungry and you need a place to eat, or if you're homeless and you need a place to sleep, they may refer you to someplace, but they won't be able to tell you anything about quality or give you any sorts of ratings from people who have gone and sought those services before. So we're trying to work with some software developers to create a 311 with, for lack of a better term, customer ratings. So that if you need services, you can find out what people in similar situations thought of the services they received from someplace. I don't know that it'll work. It may very well not work, but I think it's a important effort. Another thing is I think that nobody quite understands where technology is going to change K through 12 education, but we know that K through 12 education will not be the same a decade from now as it is now, as it is today. And it's really going to be exciting to see what technology changes bring about huge benefits to students and to teachers and to parents in K through 12.
And I would also add, in terms of resource, the resource question again, there's really a lot of innovation happening in the technology space, from crowdfunding and those kinds of things. But also, there's a couple of examples that I'll quickly give. One is DonorsChoose.org. I don't know if you all know that organization, and they were really smart right from the beginning, because they architected giving right into the mission of the organization, just like Kiva did, and some of these other organizations. By the way, just like churches and synagogues and other places, when you actually put giving not as ancillary to the mission, but as actually part of the mission, it's a much easier and more effective way to raise money. But DonorsChoose was finding that, and of course their mission is classroom projects for teachers, but they were also simultaneously caring very much about citizen philanthropy and how do we get people and build relationships with people we may never meet, but want to be part of our community. And so they actually have one of their fastest growing sources of revenue, the teachers themselves acting as solicitors, which I really love. And again, it was because the teachers shifted from feeling like, I don't want to talk about money, money's this awful thing, to saying, I really care about creating the scientists of tomorrow, and I'm trying to raise money for microscopes in my school. I'm going to be out there, joyfully asking for it. And the other thing that they did that I thought was so smart is they added a feature on their checkout. So when you give a gift of $5 or whatever to DonorsChoose, they ask you a really simple question. And that question isn't, why did you give to DonorsChoose? It's, why did you give to this project? And in that simple sort of question, it gives you this ability to connect to the outcome in a way that's very different than some amorphous organization, but to this actual project. Because my dad was a science teacher, because my first microscope opened up my world. And it's such a powerful, powerful way. Those why questions, I think, are just such powerful ways to really start to use technology in a way that's a little different.
Think about also drug development now. A lot of the funding from foundations is going to only open source. And so they're only going to give money to researchers if they have all data available all the time. So instead of waiting for Lancet to publish 3 years later, instant data is out, trying to figure out what the solutions are, and so rapid development's occurring. That's occurring everywhere. The massive change, this isn't technology, what we're seeing, for example, MIT Media Labs having an entrepreneur degree. Well, this is what we don't need is another entrepreneur degree, right? But they're giving it to engineers and designers. And they're basically flipping MBAs. So sorry, but instead of MBAs leading all development now, it's the engineers and designers and the people on the ground. And then later on, they'll hire MBAs if it all works out. And so this is a whole switch in the way in empowering old structures. And I think technology has helped us figure out how to do that.
Hi, my name is Rasanath, and I'm an entrepreneur. I run an organization that focuses on organizational health. And my question to you is, as you increase collaboration, as you increase partnerships, how do you walk the fine line where you want your vision to evolve, become bigger, and a lot of people feeling directly connected to it, and at the same time prevent it from getting diluted and hijacked?
Well, in fundraising, we call that the gift that keeps on costing. You know, you really, I think it's very tempting, you know, especially as you're growing and starting to scale, for someone to come along, or an organization, you know, a foundation or others to come along and say, that is a really good idea, but just go over here a little bit. And I've seen that happen a number of times where it really gets you off course. And so I do think there's a balance, because I also think we can't reject, you know, the fact that a lot of our partners, people who we want to be in the band, have really good, innovative ideas. So that's where I think the adaptability and the willingness to be kind of open, without the sacrificing or compromising, again, because of the money.
Nonprofit boards, we teach nonprofit board management, and so the CEOs are afraid when you first start talking about opening up the board and treating them like individuals as opposed to the board, and then actually listening to the board, asking them questions, asking them about their passions. How do I connect to that? Because there's real resources that are unlocked when you do that. They're going, oh my God, then I actually might have to do what they say. And as a good leader, you have to listen, but you don't have to do it. And your job is to come back and explain why you've chosen and make the choices you made, and people then rally around you. But they're much more likely to be with you if they feel like they've been listened to, right? So it's a little bit of that yin-yang kind of control issue. You still need to be a leader, but as a collaborative leader.
Hi, my name's Miranda Massey. I'm a law grad from NYU, and I recently left the social justice nonprofit law sector to launch a climate solutions project. It's been a fantastic panel, so thank you all. I have a question for you specifically, Jennifer, about your idea around flow, and flow being the natural state of affairs, which I love, and it's inspiring, and it's also a little counterintuitive. And I wonder whether there's a moment when that framework concretized itself for you, or an example from your work that would help bring it down to earth for those in the audience who are at the beginning of starting something.
Yeah, you know, flow basically, you know, if you look at it as kind of a grid, flow is basically challenge and skills, right? And you're in the flow state when you're maximizing your challenge and you're putting your skills into action to its maximum degree. And when you're in that space up here, things are just like unfold. We've all had those experiences. The challenge is often what we're doing is we're giving people big challenges, and they don't have the skills to meet it. You know, my stepdaughter has this with, like, you know, algebra. She's getting these big challenges but doesn't have the skills to meet it, and so we need to give her more skills training. But what happens very often in nonprofits is that people have all these skills to offer, and we're not giving them enough of a challenge. And we're not allowing people to grow enough or trust in them enough that they have the ability to meet these challenges. And so I think that's our job as nonprofit leaders, is to really understand the individuals. You know, as Jeff said, not the board is a collective necessarily, although obviously there's a collective element to it, but each board member individually, or each person who's involved in the collaboration, and saying, how are we matching skills and challenge in a way that people can really move into that flow state? Because then they're just going to get deeper and deeper and deeper, and they're going to continue to grow. You know, I'll just say that I think we spend way, way, way too much time on the social aspects. And by the way, I'm a big believer in tribe and community. All we're talking about is you've got to have tribe and community. But we miss out a lot because we're not spending enough time with that tribe and community, allowing them to grow.
Hi.
Last question.
Last question. I'll make it count. So my name is Aziz, and I'm working with a startup called Carmio. We're working on connecting small businesses and different charities. My question is actually rather broad, and it's where do you guys see the charity and nonprofit, the social commons landscape being in the far future, let's say like 2030, 2050, when you have a significantly different world? You already kind of pointed to things like increased collaboration, empowered small groups. There's a lot of whatever your vision or idea is, if you could also connect it to some like facts in terms of like the WHO says that non-communicable disease is going to overtake some of the problems that we have today as a primary kind of primary reason for a cause of death. You know, how are these kinds of things going to impact the world that we all work in?
Huge question. So a minor answer because we got one other question coming out. There's two views. The world is getting better or it's getting worse. and to me, it's all of us are making it a better place. And I'm seeing that trend in child deaths. We're seeing that trend in violence. We're seeing that trend in housing. We're seeing that trend in education. So yes, there's a lot of problems, a lot of things to go after. But empowering each individual to think that they have, you know, an ability to influence as opposed to one person telling them what the answers are, I think is the hope. And that's the opportunity to engage everyone in these flatter, more open communication structures. And I think we're still trying to figure this out. And I think that's what we're describing here is this collaborative process is a process that starts opening those conversations, that start opening those resources to others. And we're going to figure out, you know, which ones they work in and learn from each other and the Millennium Development Goals, the new set they're trying to come up with. One of the key problems is, gee, have you looked at what you've been doing and what's been successful and what we can learn from those models? And I think that's the opportunity that we're all talking about here is there's some really interesting tests and cases where it seems to have worked, but it can be applied in a lot more areas.
I mean, I was just on a conversation about aging in America, and this came up. You know, there's the demographic changes of the aging of the society. It's this sort of silver tsunami that is coming, which is either going to bankrupt the country or is going to provide this extraordinary experience dividend, where the only increasing natural resource that we have is the experience and the talent of our citizenry because of it. And essentially you have this challenge and this tremendous opportunity, and now it could go one way or it could go the other way. You can't write that story just yet. You really have to see whether or not we're actually going to get that dividend and make sure that those institutional changes are made so that people can contribute what they have to contribute. And so I think that's the question is what gets constructed, you know, in the next 10 or 15 years.
Hi, I'm Jane Aronson, and I'm the CEO of Worldwide Orphans Foundation. And my quick question, and that is about time. You've referred to time a little bit. You just ended up by saying 10 to 15 years. I'm a pediatrician, and my work is based in early childhood development. We're in a number of countries, and we're really focused on very deep psychosocial programming. And so I really believe passionately that it's a lifetime that really finally changes the system. And I find that, you know, sometimes I'm a bit alone in that feeling and thought, and I'm looking for a little bit of support, a little bit of intellectual support on the score that I believe that systemic change does take at least a generation or two, and that we haven't really had that opportunity in the current fundraising and you know, the environment we've been in. By the way, I've read your book, I've read a number of White Man's Burden, different books. Everyone sort of speaks to it, but finally isn't convinced that we need that time to make the changes. And so we're always clipped. You know, you get a 3-year grant, you get a 2-year grant, and then you just don't have the opportunity to really finally do the work you need to do over a long period of time. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think I'm foolish?
I mean, Jennifer, you had a great comment about really, if this is a long-term journey, and it is a lifetime or a life's work, then being able to do it and constantly renew the work and have it nourish you as you go is really the essential question. Or do you have durable motivation, durable creativity in doing this kind of work? And it seems to me that you really can't have it unless you're working with other people in a way that's truly satisfying and joyful and meaningful. And so I think, you know, in some ways divorcing social change from the collaborative framework is lining people up for these sort of short-term stints trying to change the world and then burning out and doing something else. So I think that there's definitely a human, you know, I mean, one of the questions that this leads to is, and I guess this could lead into our closing comments, is just what are the questions that this conversation leads us to ask ourselves about the way that we work and the way that we've sort of constructed our life's work or our life's journey. I think in some ways that if it is a marathon that is ahead of us, how do we think of that versus the way that we might have been answering those questions in a more conventional way? Closing remarks, or?
Well, I would just echo that again, and I had already said that this, at least my worldview is that this is very much about co-creation and collaboration and not problem solving. I do think there are specific challenges and problems that can be solved, and I would, happily wake up tomorrow and all the stuff we're talking about on this stage is solved. But there's always going to be, life is an unfinished opus, and so there's always going to be the next thing and the next thing. And so the challenge for us is how do we get these jazz bands put together that want to continue to work on this? And it's also, to David's point, personally fulfilling, and people we want meaning, we want something bigger than ourselves. And so how are we fostering that and reminding ourselves of that? We live these really meaningful, deeply meaningful lives, and we forget because we get so sort of bogged down in the work. And so, I'll just end really quickly with an exercise that it's in the book, but we talk a lot about, and it's just at the end of the day or the end of a meeting or, at the end of a conversation, I call it SIM, and it's something that surprised, inspired, or moved you. And so if we had time, I would love to go around to each one of you and say, what in this conversation surprised, inspired, or moved you? Because we lead these really meaningful lives, but we miss it because we're not reflecting on it enough.
So the old models, I think, many of them are broken. The old model of, sorry, David, 1,100 person in room full of people who want to give money, but not connecting. Robin does an amazing job doing fundraising. And he's one of my best friends, so I can say that. But but these old models of let me hold a fundraiser and let me spend 6 months doing it, and then let's take everybody give money, and then have no connective conversations at 2.5-hour dinner. I think being here, honestly, if I were you, I'd be a little frustrated because there's probably a lot of really cool people in this audience that you don't know yet, and you're not connecting to yet, and you'd like to. And so the models really need to change as to when you're showing up here with people that are passionate about this subject, take time to actually talk to each other. Take time during the presentations, I think, and start asking these questions. We've had, we have this idea in the book called Jeffersonian dinners. I made it up because I was chairman of Monticello. And imagine having dinner with Thomas Jefferson, but have dinners with each other, 12 to 15 people, having conversations about something that's relevant and important to you. Spend 2.5 hours doing that. Right? Find others that you're passionate about and build networks around. The public narrative is all about community organizing. I think that's going to transform nonprofit, cause-based, social enterprise-based organizations, where you find, how do I find other people? How do I make it sustainable? How do I drive it down to the lowest foundational level? Well, it's empowering those 12 and 15 people under an umbrella of knowledge and experience. So finding those others, I think, is key. Having openings. So before you leave, say hello to the person next to you.
Final thoughts. Thank you. That hundreds of people showed up on a actually beautiful Wednesday night to be part of this conversation. Thank you for giving me hope, giving us hope, inspiring us, and because you all are doing extraordinary things. So thank you.